to the height, and I know I'm a little bit
I
shorter.
think it's okay. Hi, how are you?
I'll have to use these.
Oh,
Hi, I'm
wait a
doing
second.
great.
Hold
How
on.
are you doing?
Now I can hear you. I'm good. How about yourself?
Great. It's so nice to meet you.
That's nice to meet you. It sounds exciting to be writing the book.
My internet sucks. Let me disable my camera. Goodbye for
Okay.
for faces.
Yeah, that's
Um,
clear. That's more clear.
Great. Okay, great. Yeah, that was clearly. I live in West Virginia right now, and our rural internet is a little rural. But anyway, yeah, so I'm writing this story about face blindness, and I wanted to talk to other people who discovered. When did you discover that you were face blind?
I had some version of it. It kind of slowly got, I think, a little worse with time. I noticed it. Um, a friend and I um, stayed up one night when I was in the restaurant business. The first time I realized that there was a dramatic difference between me and other people was
Uh-huh.
a friend and I stayed up and we were at a party and we talked. We both talked to this other guy, and we'd have lunch with him the next day, and we both were with him the same amount of time, right? We were both
Uh-huh.
just chatting away, and then the next day we met him for lunch, um, and I didn't recognize him. I just thought I assumed that my friend wouldn't recognize him either, but she did. She said, "Of course I recognized him." I thought, "Well, that's interesting." And then I didn't. I just thought, well, I'm also dyslexic, so I figured, well, that's just one of those things. I'm maybe not as good as other people. And then there was a time when my brother came out to the restaurant, and I hadn't seen him in a year and a half. He's 7 years older, and he had this scruffy beard. And he sat. I was sitting at the bar of my restaurant talking to a bartender, and this guy was sitting there having a beer. It was the kind of end of lunch, and he said that. And I just started talking to my bartender about this and that. Um, and I kind of glanced at the guy next to me and didn't, I wasn't really paying attention. And then he said something. He thought it was hilarious that I was chatting away and I didn't recognize him. And he said, yes, the bartender said, "Could I get another?" As soon as I heard his voice, I said, "Sydney, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be in Colorado."
Uh-huh.
Um, anyway, so and there was one of the other staff members said, "Well, maybe you've got that face blindness thing." I said, "What face blindness thing?" And they said, that there's I can't remember whether it was Oliver Sacks or somebody had written something about it.
Uh-huh.
Um, but anyway, it was a thing. And so then, at that point, I really started paying attention and noticing it, and noticing just how bad I was. In the restaurant business, people expect you to see who they are. They expect to be recognized.
Uh-huh.
They want to be celebrated when they come into your restaurant and the owner's there. Um, and it had always been a very difficult thing for me. So, I think everybody develops their own ways of dealing with face blindness. But for me, the thing was always, once I kind of figured out that this was something that I wasn't as good as other people at, I started really looking at uh, people, how they looked at me.
Mhm.
And if they looked like they knew me, then I tried to look like I knew them, and I tried to gauge my warmth and reception to them as a function of how warm and receptive they were to me. And so I'd give people either shake hands or maybe give a little hug, or I might kiss a woman on the cheek. And, a couple times over the last 20 years, maybe 3 or 4 times, people have said, a young woman will say, "Do I know you?" And that's a problem just because they're friendly looking. And I assumed they knew me. I said, "Oh no, I think I confused you. I'm so sorry." But it's funny. Most people, once I kind of figured that out, and certainly ever since I've been in politics, I've been aware. That was really, I guess, politics is really when I really began to kind of hone in on it as a tactical
Uh-huh.
strategy. I just can't have a tactical strategy, but as a strategy, the people in politics generally, most political people are very good at recognizing faces. They're like at the
Yeah.
far end of the scale. Um, and I had at some point, I can't remember when I did, but I took there was an online, I'm sure it's still there, an online test that they have you look at celebrities and faces and have them pictures of them with different haircuts or different, you know, other things. Because obviously, that's the one thing. If someone always has the same haircut, that makes things a lot better.
Yeah.
Um, when your brother grows a scruffy beard and his hair gets shaggy, that that's a cause for concern. But anyway, as in the political business, it's not a bad thing to be overly friendly. Actually, it's a good thing to be in the restaurant business. That
Uh-huh.
kind of treat everybody like they might be a friend.
Yeah.
Um, as the writer Kurt Vonnegut once told me, um, you, you know, you got to be careful who you pretend to be because that's who you become, and that by training yourself to be welcoming, let's say,
Uh-huh.
friendly, especially friendly to everybody you meet. On the off chance that they're someone you've already met, it makes you a more friendlier person, and you become a friendlier person. And that's again in the restaurant business and in politics, that's a good thing, not a bad thing.
Did you, when you were younger, before you really realized that you were face blind, do you think it might have caused like any misunderstandings or social problems or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I had um, and this is just my own personal issue. I am, on Myers-Briggs, I'm off the scale as an extrovert. In other words,
Uh-huh.
I get energy from people, and I'm drawn to people. But when I grew up, I was the youngest of four kids, and um, my mother was widowed twice before she was 40. So
Mm.
when her second husband, my father, died, and I was just 8, and no one really had any time for me. And I was skinny, and I had these thick glasses, and I mean, part of it, I didn't get glasses until I was in third grade.
Oh, wow.
Um, and once I got them, I was like, oh my God, that's what leaves look like on trees. Wow, isn't that beautiful? And so, somebody along the way told me that that's one of the possible sources of prosopagnosia is if you're really myopic,
Hmm.
and right when your brain is evolving to, you know, recognizing facial characteristics and then inventorying them, it's that part of the brain that creates an inventory that it can access anytime momentarily.
Yeah.
Uh, if your brain's growing and learning how to do that, which is unique among mammals, and probably among most creatures, uh, if your brain's getting blurry images, it probably doesn't develop that capability. So that was one doctor told me that was where they thought maybe it could be part of the issue. Anyway, when I was little, I was an extrovert with no confidence, and I think that's
Mm.
kind of what the definition of shy or timid is. I mean, I think that's where that comes from. But I would sit there since I didn't really know, when I met kids, I'd hear their names, but then I'd meet them 2 days or a week later, and I didn't know which one was who. And that made me, even though I wanted to hang out with them, it made me even more shy and more
Hmm.
unable to kind of reach out and make those connections. And I can remember looking out my bedroom window over the hedge. I was up on the second floor and looking over the hedge at the neighbors playing basketball in their driveway, against the garage, and just
Hmm.
dying to go over there. But I couldn't really remember who they were, with their names were. I'd met them once or twice, like at stuffy, neighborhood things. So it was an impediment, to going forward. And again, even in college, I mean, I didn't really date. I wasn't very successful in dating until I was in college, and even then, it was a long, slow process. Um, but it didn't help the fact that, if you go to a party and you meet someone, you have this wonderful conversation, you'd see her the next day on campus, and you wouldn't recognize her, and she would think you were, you know, kind of blowing her off or not interested or not, whereas I was just clueless.
Yeah, I definitely. What do you think changed to give you the confidence you needed just to be friendly all the time?
Yeah, I mean, I had a couple strikes on me already in terms of confidence, um, but certainly always feeling that I was running into strangers, always surrounded, always in a universe of strangers. And it's
Yeah.
funny that the year my father died, I switched schools. Before he died, he moved us into a slightly nicer neighborhood with a better public school. And so when I went to that new school, I had a horrendously difficult time fitting in. And it took me a long time to figure out which kids were which. And during that period, I just really kept to myself. Um, and by the end by the end of the year, I was coming home in tears to my mother, and she had a little chart that, she'd give me a gold star or a silver star or a purple star based on whether I had been said anything not nice about somebody behind their back, or if I teased somebody. She was kind of trying to make me more aware of my behavior so that I wouldn't, piss all these other kids off, because I became, in elementary school, each year there's usually one kid that gets picked on a lot, and in my third grade year, that was me.
So, so did you say what changed? I forgot. Like, how did you just sort of slowly gain confidence over time?
Yeah, I was. it's interesting that a large percentage of the people in the United States Senate were presidents of their class, either in high school or college.
Uh-huh.
That, if you ask any of my friends in high school or college, I was the least likely ever
Oh.
to be president or in politics, just because the way, I was more reserved and I didn't try to. I don't know. I was always trying to make friends, but not. I was never the leader. I was a good sidekick.
Hmm.
It really wasn't until I opened the restaurant. Well, once I got a master's in geology and I had a job, kind of doing exploration in the mountains of the West, Montana, Wyoming, Colorado, and I loved that. And I thought, and that gave me a lot of confidence. I had that what I thought was a really interesting job, and I'd done that on my own. And then once, of course, then when the commodities prices all tanked in the 1980s, and our company got sold and we all got laid off, and there were no jobs. That's when I started the brew pub back in '88. And that's really where I felt I came in and I was good at it. I was good at deciding, I was the CEO, it was my idea. I helped raise all the money and talk all these investors. I mean, my own mother wouldn't invest. So no one had ever seen a brew pub. My mother said, "Who wants to eat dinner in a brewery?" I said, "No, Mom, it's like a bakery. The beer is food. Beer is fresh, goes bad." Anyway, it took a couple of years to raise the money and put it all together. Luckily, I got a huge severance. I got 2 years' pay. In those days, they were very generous when they ended people's careers. But anyway, opening the restaurant and kind of being the boss and helping people succeed in their jobs and kind of solving problems, I was really good at it. And it turned out, even though I never had confidence. I mean, if I hadn't gotten laid off, I would have stayed as a geologist forever, and probably never. I was a good geologist. I wasn't a great geologist, and I probably never would have been a leader in that sense.
Hmm.
But really, in the restaurant business, which it really was more, if you're extroverted and smart and good at solving problems and helping bring people together, to work out their issues, you in the restaurant business, that's recognized and valued. And so all of a sudden, we were the coolest restaurant in town, and all of a sudden, I was, being noticed and invited to dinner parties that I would have never been invited to as a geologist.
Hmm.
So that gave me the confidence to kind of go along. And then, it's funny that, and this is a weird thing, but in 1999, I got LASIK surgery.
Uh-huh.
And so instead of having these, I couldn't, my eyes were too sensitive for at least in those days, the types of, either the super lightweight plastic glasses or contact lenses.
Hmm.
I just couldn't handle contact lenses, especially. So when I got rid of the thick glasses and did LASIK surgery, that was 1999, and it was amazing what difference that made in me.
Hmm.
I don't think that's connected to prosopagnosia, but I certainly had more confidence in myself. I always thought I kind of looked like a nerd, like a dork, and so I was so slow to date and not sure what I wanted to do with my life for a long time. It took me a long time to, I didn't start really fall in love with geology. My first geology course was my senior year in college. So I had to go back, and to get a master's, it took me 3 years plus 2 years to write the thesis. They gave me tenure as a student. Anyway, I'm sure prosopagnosia was in that mix somewhere, but the issues of confidence were, and it's quite possible that they came along with the prosopagnosia. And in those days in high school and most of college, I didn't know that. Well, in high school and college, I guess most of my geology time wasn't really until the restaurant business I really began to recognize that I was different. I just couldn't recognize faces the way everybody else could.
Did learning that it's, that face blindness is a thing, how did that change your perspective on yourself, or was that like kind of helpful to learn?
Yeah. Oh my God, it was hugely reassuring, because what happens is you feel like you're unworthy. You're not good enough. I can't tell you how many people thought that I was just too good for them, especially when in the restaurant business, before I kind of began to realize that this was an issue, and it was an issue that other people had as well. But certainly in those early years of the restaurant business, and I think a lot of during college, I think people thought I was they thought I was self-important, or too busy for them or something. I don't know.
Hmm.
But it certainly, it's not good for your confidence for people to think that you're a jerk.
So do you tell people now when you meet them that?
Yeah. Oh, for 10 years.
Yeah.
Or more than that, probably for 20 years, I'm trying to remember exactly when I figured out what the word was for it. I'd have to go back and I keep notes every day of what the things go on. I could figure that out. But it was at least 15 years ago. It was when I was in politics, I think.
Uh-huh.
I mean, I became aware that I wasn't good at it and that other people were better when I was in the restaurant business. That was clear.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't. I'm not quite sure I can remember exactly when I heard the word prosopagnosia, because that's really when I felt like, huh. I mean, the same thing with dyslexia.
Uh-huh.
You know, that I'm moderately dyslexic, and everybody just thought I was lazy in high school.
Oh.
And, you know, they just thought that I tested really well, and you know, I'm sure I was pretty lazy, like most teenagers,
But not especially lazy.
but not especially lazy. And it was, you know, it was when I heard about dyslexia, which was that I remember vividly,
Uh-huh.
right as I was graduating college. They were just beginning to test for it more frequently, and I was complaining about how I couldn't get I was always having to rush to get my assignments done, even when I set a whole weekend aside to get caught up. And they asked me, it was interesting. They asked the person was studying psychology, and they said, "Do you get distracted easily?" And I said, "Yeah, I get distracted." And I said, "Well," they said, "Well, that's a classic. That often goes along with dyslexia because you read so slowly that it doesn't really, you don't engage quite as intensely as other people would engage."
Mm-hmm.
So it turns out that is not uncommon among dyslexics. And I wonder if people with prosopagnosia also are more easily distractible, just because so often they're just kind of in a sea of strange faces.
Yeah, that's a good question. You know, one thing I have read is that we're more likely to have aphantasia, which is a really poor visual imagination.
Yeah,
Do you?
I'm awful.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So my wife remembers every line from movies, remembers all the scenes. She remembers every bit of it.
Uh-huh.
And I just don't. I don't remember what something looked like. Like when we were looking to buy a house, I had to walk through the house 6 times or 7 times really to get the rooms straight and what they looked like and where they were. Where she walked through the first time and she could have sketched the whole thing on a couple pieces of paper. It's really, and that is also, I didn't know that was sometimes connected to prosopagnosia, but that really does make sense in that I'm very good at remembering facts and
Uh-huh.
abstract ideas, you know, policy ideas, but kind of what you see and what that moment looks like and what happens in that moment is again not something that I would hold up as not something I'm good at.
Oh, that's so
Interesting. I didn't know
interesting. Yeah, there's some researchers in Toronto who they call it nomothetic disorder, but it's like you sort of see that you miss the trees for the forest. Like you're just a really big picture thinker.
I don't know if that might be me. I don't. I'll have to look at it. What's it called? Nomo.
Well, actually, it's really called SDAM. I just like their alternative better. It's like SDAM.
SDAM. I'll check that
Yeah.
out. Because I think I do worry sometimes that I'm not as like I'm great in groups, in small groups of kind of helping people work through and resolve problems and issues.
Hmm.
But the actual granular details of, you know, just what that looks like. There are other people. Usually I have been successful by surrounding myself with people really good at details.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm
Well,
terrible at details. Um, what else did I want to ask you? I guess I was curious, is there anyone in your family who is really bad or even really good with faces?
um, so I have I have a sister and brother who had a different father. And
Uh-huh.
he died at the end of World War II, but they are both very good with faces.
Mm.
Um, my sister, I'll have to ask her whether she's good with faces. I'll bet she's not. You know, it's funny, we've never discussed face blindness. You know, it's like I don't know, if you've got something that's not quite right. It's not something I naturally bring up, unless it's someone whose face I didn't recognize, in which case I immediately bring it up and say, you know, the phrase I use all the time now is I say, you know, it's a medical condition. Because somehow
Yeah.
I think that justifies and makes it more real for a lot of people. The
Yeah.
you know that notion of does it help in some way, you know, and being, you know, more friendly because at least once I understood that this is what it was and I could really, you know, kind of model my behavior and become a little more intentional about making people not feel that I was a jerk. I think that has been a big part of I opened the restaurant, and I was 36 years old.
Hmm.
And really that's when started becoming a leader. And I think that's interesting that, you talk to almost every other US senator, and they were involved in various forms of leadership. They were the editor in chief of this, or they were the president of their class, or,
Yeah.
and, Michael Bennett, who he and I both went to the same college in Connecticut, Wesleyan University.
Uh-huh.
And he's also dyslexic,
Uh-huh.
but he remembers every face.
Oh,
And he was,
lucky.
of course, he was president of his class in college, right? And because he was a natural leader and had the confidence and, the wherewithal to kind of navigate those social waters that could allow one to be a political leader in school.
Hmm.
And again, they did a mock poll right after I got elected. Uh, uh, let's see, I guess I was elected mayor, and it was I think it was our 30th anniversary. Anyway, a lot of people didn't know I'd been elected mayor, so they sent
Uh-huh.
out a questionnaire for our reunion and just asked, they put like 8 names, 8 kids we all knew, who were all pretty, capable, nice people, and said, who do you think is the most likely and who's the least likely? I guess they asked of all our classmates, the most likely and the least likely, and I got the most votes as least likely to be political.
Oh my
Of the
God.
Yeah, which was, I don't know, it just there was obviously a flexure point there where I became better and more confident, because there's so much of it's confidence.
Hmm.
Um, and that in the end, understanding that prosopagnosia was a real thing yeah, at least for me, was a huge confidence builder.
Yeah. What did I want to ask? Oh yeah, so do you think that like it would be helpful to have, I don't know if screening, like, is it a big deal enough for people to like be concerned about raising awareness or accommodating children or screening even?
Yeah, it's funny because I do look at what the costs are to add steps to the day of an elementary school teacher or an
Hmm.
elementary school nurse. I'd have to go. Maybe I'll go back online and take that test. I took it years ago,
Uh-huh.
um, but I'll go
Oh,
back
let me
online.
give you a better test. The celebrity one is not that good. I'll send you the Cambridge face memory test.
Okay, great. All right, and I'll go back and see where I measure on it and see how easy the test is. Because in other words, if it's easy to um, if it's easy to give, yeah, maybe it is a good thing to let people know that this is something that is no different than being tall or short, or you know uh, a good athlete or uncoordinated, or all those different things, all those ways that we are different from each other, which is that's life. Uh,
Hmm.
to recognize it's just one of those differences and not that big a deal, I think might be very helpful to people.
Yeah.
I mean, I
I
don't know how
think
many people. Do they know how many people? They used to say it was like 1 in 50, I think, or 1 in
that's
25
still
or
what
something.
it seems to be. Yeah.
Yeah. So that again, to create a screening process for something that's really so rare, um, uh, is hard. But
Yeah.
again, it made such a difference to me just knowing that what I wasn't lazy. That's what It was all lumped together with he's just not with it. He's lazy.
Hmm. Yeah. Do you um oh shoot, what was my question? I keep forgetting. Um it's just so fun to talk to
You're
people.
distracted. You're distracted.
I know. Well, it's just always so interesting. I mean, oh yeah, I know what I wanted to ask. So when you have, I always assumed that if I was ever famous or important, I would have an assistant who just told me who everyone was. Do you have anyone like that?
Oh my God. So my wife functions like that because she remembers
Uh-huh.
every face perfectly. Have you ever watched the TV show Veep?
Yeah.
So the body person, I forget the actor's name,
Uh-huh.
and one of the famous scenes is that there's a long line and he's right beside her whispering in her ear. And he always whispers the totally obvious stuff that of course she knows. Um, but then this one time it's a kind of an older man, an attractive younger woman coming that are next in line, and she looks at him angry because he hasn't said anything, she goes, wife or daughter, and so it's not really prosopagnosia, but it the fact is that people who are in politics generally do have someone like that.
Yeah.
And when I was in the restaurant business, it was funny. That was one of the things we kind of looked at. We didn't have a test for it or anything, but you could tell whether servers and hosts uh, remembered the regular customers and had that ability to kind of have a relationship with someone who came in. Let's say they came in once a week or once every 2 weeks,
Hmm.
um, and we tried to give them places where they could interface with the more valuable customers, the people that came in more frequently and came in groups,
Uh-huh.
because it's interesting. People really do want to be recognized when they go out to restaurants. Not everybody, but
Yeah.
many people do. And your restaurant, our restaurant was very successful. We used to do, we only had 160 seats, and we could do there were a few years there where we would do 1,000 dinners
Wow.
in a day, 1,000 meals. And part of that was just making sure that we had staff that was much better than I was at at recognizing people, and we trained the staff that I wasn't that good at it, so they would always be, oh, John, you remember Mr. Callahan? They didn't have to do a formal education, but they would just kind of help me do that. Even sometimes, I mean,
That's great.
after about 4 or 5 or 6 times, I can get people and keep it, as long as they don't change their hairstyle, or get new glasses or something. I can hold up pretty well. But some people, after about 3 or 4 times, they say, no, he knows me, and they said, oh, I'm sorry, and then they apologized. It was no big deal. But I was grateful that I'd been introduced that 5th time, just because I wouldn't have.
Yeah. That's really cool. So like if I'm trying to think of how to sum up your prosopagnosia story, it's like you were such an extrovert at heart, but you couldn't really express it because you were having trouble connecting with people because you couldn't remember who was who. And then you ended up starting a restaurant and you suddenly had to sort of make it work and you figured it out. You figured out some workarounds and then you got to be a senator.
And then I got to be a senator. Exactly. I mean, it's funny, if you're going to take someone with prosopagnosia and think of the worst job you could put them in, it would be a restaurant. The person running a restaurant. Until you realize there's such a thing as being a politician, in
Yeah.
which case that's even worse.
It's worse. It's worse. I mean, I was very kind of upset when I found out I was a Faceblind reporter. I'm like, oh, I'm a very bad reporter then.
No, it's so funny. It's so funny. I have, they give me flashcards of all the other senators. It was so hard because, again, senators have a great deal of confidence and believe that they should be recognized immediately after one meeting. And that's just impossible. And I still, there are 3 or 4 senators who I don't work with. I'm not on their committees, and they look so similar to me that it's just hard. Dan Sullivan is a senator, Republican senator from Alaska, and then what's his name, Tillis. Can't think what his first name is. Tom Tillis. I mean, they're 2 really good senators, both of whom I really like it, and now I can tell them apart. But it took me a year.
Yeah.
And really kind of working at it because they both have the same graying of their hairs. They both have broad foreheads, large eyes. I mean, they're kind of similar, but once you get to know them, they don't look anything like each other. If I were to go tell people, God, I couldn't tell them apart, people say, well, what's the matter with you? Anyway, yeah.
Do you have any funny stories of mistaken identity from your past?
I mean, all kinds of stuff that, and people think it's one of the big issues, or at least I had to deal with, was a lot of people are unsure of whether they're attractive or not,
Mm-hmm.
it's an issue in America for many obvious reasons. Anyway, my wife is a beautiful woman,
Mm-hmm.
and yet I had to meet her 3 times, right? and we had an amazing conversation, but again, then she was another tall, dark-haired, really attractive woman of which I knew lots, but I didn't know which one was which or who they were. And so, that was a little awkward. And she was very great, but it certainly bothered her, that
Uh-huh.
that this person she kind of liked didn't seem to have any interest in her. It's pretty funny.
My husband, very regularly, I'll be like, when did you get so cute? Because I think I really do like surprised every time I see him.
Well, I said to her at one point, I said, because again, once we started dating and fell in love, she still gave me kind of a hard time about it. And I said, well, sweetheart, you are so beautiful. I mean, you're not Hollywood kind of beautiful, but you're really beautiful. And she said, don't you ever say that to me again. Not Hollywood beautiful.
Well, it's funny you say that because when you watch, I mean, a lot of people realize that they're face blind because they can't follow television or movies.
Even movies, my God, if they have dark hair and they don't have glasses, if they don't have a giveaway, it's hopeless. It's so the rom-coms, who's the protagonist and who's the hero and who's the kind of who's going to end up without the girl. There's
Yeah.
always, and oftentimes they kind of look alike. And my God, if you miss a couple scenes, and it's so hard. And again, I will, these days it's so nice that you can watch, movies on your iPad.
Mhm.
And my wife's in the media business, and so she's always she has to watch a lot of shows. So I watch a lot of shows, and she'll watch them for about 20 minutes and fall asleep, and I'll be gripped and watch it. But as long as she's awake, I keep saying, which one is he? Which one? What about her? Which one is she? Is she the one who was so rude, or is she the one who spilled her coffee? It's like, I don't know. It does that. I mean, that's the part that makes me think that I've always had it,
Yeah.
because that's always been an issue my whole
Yeah.
life.
I think that is like one of the big ways that people realize that they're different than average, because they're obviously making these movies for average viewers who can keep track of that stuff.
Yeah, but it didn't occur to me that's again, the social discomfort is such that I didn't think of it in terms of, well, God, all these other people must be good at this. I just thought, God, it must be hard to make movies because it's so hard to tell people
Uh-huh.
apart.
Yeah. Well, it's been so fun chatting with you, and I cannot believe that you are a prosopagnosic politician. You are even, I feel like you're almost as unlikely as Chuck Close, who, how he did the
Yeah.
big portraits.
He's the ultimate, the poster child. But I think in terms of careers, I think a journalist is pretty far up the list as well.
Thank you. It is pretty terrible. Whenever I meet like a PR person, I never can find them later. Like,
Well,
I just,
the other thing that's like that is I have some friends in the media business. So there's a guy, I don't know if you've ever met a guy named Frank Bruni. He used to write, he covered the restaurants for about 7 years for the New York Times. And then he went out and covered the Vatican, and then he became a political reporter. But I met him right after I got elected mayor, and he had just started being a political reporter, and he could not believe that a restaurant owner was mayor of a major city. He just couldn't believe it. He just thought it was hysterical. And
uh-huh.
so as I kind of worked my way up the ecosystem, we were great friends. And when I ran for president, he threw this wonderful lunch where he had 10 of the top political journalists in New York. A couple of people came up from DC, and we all had this wonderful 2.5 hour lunch where I got to tell stories and let them get to know me and whatever. But it was so hard because they all kind of let me get to know them. And when you can't remember faces, boy, all those stories kind of blend together.
Yeah.
And it was, again and again, what had been such a great blessing was a little bit of a curse.
Well, I'll
So
send you on the Cambridge Face Memory Test if you
great.
feel like taking it. And yeah, thank you so much for chatting with me. I'll let you see my little part of the book that you're in before it goes to press, and I'll let you know how it all goes. And I'll turn on
Well,
my video so I could say goodbye.